And I think, just like you said, some fields are working very diligently at that with action research models, community-based participatory action research models.
Yes.
But this is stuff as practitioners that we already know. This is the work that we do. And so it doesn't necessarily, it's not new to us. But maybe the languaging around it that we're learning in the university and in the academic environment is new. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the other differences too is I know everybody that was in my cohort came from a professional environment where they're responsible for getting things done, not just putting things on paper and presenting them to people, but actually taking things, moving them forward, establishing them, and that followed through in the way that they thought and prepared their recommendations as well, I think.
Yeah, and I I've had a chance to read the dissertations from your first cohort, from your cohort, and it's been really exciting to see how those dissertations take on that approach to turning their research into action with recommendations for not just recommendations for future study, but policy recommendations. Giving back to the community, what in the academic world we call knowledge mobilization.
Okay.
And how those dissertations have that grounded component, that action component built into it. So it's been really interesting.
Oh, cool. Well, I'm glad you're able to have a chance to run through them and see that.
Yeah. So I thought maybe we could just go through this deck. There's 7 reflections, and I'd be really interested in some of your feedback and some of the your experiences that you've had, not only as a doctoral researcher in the program, but also as a practitioner.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure, I'd love to.
So the deck, I call it a paradigm for applied research, 7 reflections.
Okay.
And so the first one, is the work that we're doing. It's relational, on such a large level that we're learning from each other. And it's moving away from that idea that we're experts going into a community or an organization or wherever that research field site may be, and coming in there to teach and to disseminate knowledge. But really, we're learning from each other.
Yes, and I would have to say that is something that I definitely experienced. When I approached the community, they already had a functioning language program on the ground that they were using technology in. And I learned, I participated in language classes to understand how they learned the language and how they were moving it out into the community, why it was important to them. And it was through working with the individuals within the language program that I got a better feel for how any of my recommendations could possibly apply to them and how they were using it. It was incredible. So, we say, if you look on the Royal Roads website, we learn from our cohort, we learn from our professors, but in reality, I learned probably much more from the community that I was working with as to what they were doing and where they were going in order to be able to roll it all up and encompass it in my case study.
Yeah, that's great. And can you remind me, what community was it that you were working with again?
So I was working with the Stalo people. They're a group of 22 different First Nations communities in southern BC, so in the Fraser Valley, and they speak, I was primarily working with the communities that speak a language called Upriver Halkomelem.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that cohort model, like you mentioned, that the program, our doctoral program, and many of the programs here at Royal Roads are modeled after, really encompasses that idea that we learn from each other, that relational
very
concept.
much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. The individuals within the cohort were all professionals. They're lawyers, bankers, CEOs, and when I came in, I was able to learn so much from their perspective, what they've seen in their profession, as well as we each came from different academic backgrounds. And so we were able to learn from each other's, their knowledge base that they had put into play. And I learned a tremendous amount about how to not just relate to each other, but also how everybody else learned in previous research that they had done.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think some of my most memorable research experiences in the field have been those opportunities I've taken to just reach out to people. I like to sort of joke that I like to put the social back into science. And that relational piece is actually, sometimes we get so focused on our research and as academics we tend to be maybe a little more introverted. I know that I can be like that. So actually making it, reaching out to people, strangers, and striking up conversations and sharing why you're in that location, what kind of work you're doing. And I remember one time doing that and meeting this gentleman, and that connection that I was able to make by just reaching out, it took my research on a totally different tangent, and provided an opportunity for me to actually access data that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to access. So
and it's interesting that you talk about those connections that you make. I have to admit that as for myself, I love to do the literature reviews, and I love to sit down and write. Reaching out to individuals, whether cold or warm, whether you know them or you're reaching out to them as a stranger, is very uncomfortable for me. That took me significantly out of my comfort zone, and it required quite a bit of deliberate talking to myself. That's okay. What's the worst that can happen? Those types of conversations for me to be able to move forward. And that was it was a great learning experience. It was very stressful, probably one of the most stressful experiences of the doctoral program. But I learned so much from it, about the community, about the individuals, and about myself in doing it. Yeah. That's
awesome.
Highly recommend it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Okay, well, I'm going to go on to the next point. And so my next reflection was, it's that the research and work that we're doing, it's ethical. And that we're always doing research in a good way. And what I mean by this, and what I want to put out there is that it's the research isn't just, it's not ethics. So we have our ethics process, and that's really, really important. We have our Tri-Council ethics guidelines that we follow, and we write and we work with the great people in our research office, and we have our ethics pieces in play. But for me, it goes deeper, and I like to think of this idea of there's a deeper ethics. How we carry ourselves as human beings, as individuals, when we're out in the field, when we're working with people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different genders, how we relate. Going back to the first reflection, that relational piece, that idea of how our good thoughts and showing up in a good way and being really open. As an anthropologist, I've learned to be able to suspend disbelief, so to speak, and show up, with a good mind. I think some of the elders I remember hearing talking about that idea of showing up with a good mind and choosing your words really carefully. And it's really important. And as you say, there's an ethics process, and we have to complete forms at the university. As part of my research, I also I interviewed students at a second university, and so I was required to use their ethics process. I worked with the First Nations community. I was required to use their ethics process. But really, while that's good and it sets guidelines, it's really the surface, sort of the tip of the iceberg. When you're working with these individuals and you're meeting with them, there's so much both ethical and from an integrity perspective, right? You want to, first of all, show up,
You want to make sure that you do what you say you're going to do. You want to make sure that you follow up. If you've said that you're going to consult them prior to publishing anything, well, make sure you do. Not, sure, they may come back to you 4 years later and say you didn't consult with me, but really, how would you feel if somebody interviewed you for an hour and then went away and left you hanging? You never heard anything else.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I did research in a First Nations community. I'm not First Nations, so I was coming in as a total stranger. I did a ton of research prior to approaching the community, and I don't know if I've shared this with you, but there's so much material out there about being careful as to how you approach a First Nations community that in one of the conversations I was having with one of my research subjects, I mentioned that I had read all of this, and I was really feeling a little paralyzed between what I should and shouldn't say. And they helped me to work through that to ensure that I was comfortable with that community.
That's great.
But yeah, it's a huge part and often not given the amount of focus that needs to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think because we're putting ourselves out there not just as scholars and as professionals, but as humans, as
people.
Individuals, as people. And the work that you and I do, Nicole, we're in people's homes.
That's
people
right.
invite us into. We build relationships with families, and we see kids grow up, and I mean, and it's really that human connection, and I think sometimes I remember one time being in a community back out east, and a good friend of mine, I was staying with him and his family, and his daughter asked me, "What are you doing here?" I was there to do some research, and I thought about it, and I said, I'm here to do research for you and your grandkids, because really that idea of thinking 7 generations has had such an impact on me in terms of how I approach my work.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
At some point, I'd like to hear more about that 7 generations.
Yeah.
How does that link into to how you do research?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. That's a great question. Yeah, I'd love to share some of that.
Okay.
So it's ethical, and so it's a deep ethical sort of piece that we work on. So the next thing is it's inclusive, so that we're always seeking feedback and collaboration.
Right.
And I think you've experienced this. It's pretty fresh for you, having done your dissertation, working with the committee. That sort of iterative process that this kind of applied research is.
It is very iterative, and it's iterative. I found it iterative at several different levels.
Yeah.
So, for example, I worked with the community members, and so I would do the interviews, and I extracted what I had extracted, did the analysis, wrote it up, went back to them to ensure that I had appropriately interpreted what they were saying.
Yes.
But at the same time, I was working with my supervisor in an iterative process to ensure I was going down the right path, and I had everything ticked off.
Yeah.
But thirdly, I was working with the committee as well, because what people may not understand or realize is that each committee member, of course, has a certain stake in what I'm doing, and they have their own perspective and what they think should be gotten out of this. So when you work with all of these individuals in an iterative process, hopefully it takes you down the path to the right answer and a final product that you need to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it can be difficult and challenging to reach out and be inclusive, because we're used to working as individuals. I know for myself, I like to say I fly solo a lot. I do a lot of solo work, and I spend a lot of time in the archives and in the library. But some of my best work, I feel, it comes out of that inclusive piece and working with teams, whether they're community researchers or bringing in people or working with students on projects, and bringing in all those multiple perspectives. And it's not easy. It's not easy to it's not easy to have multiple perspectives coming in. because sometimes we get very personal about our research, and
Mhm.
so yeah.
Yeah, and actually it's interesting because we talk about iterative, and recently in my professional life, because I actually work as a program manager as well for a corporation, I had this exact scenario happen where we created a business case, we went out, we researched all of the information, we did iterative interviews and results analysis, and by the time we were actually presenting it to our board or our senior team members, the feedback that we had gotten was that this was the way to do this type of business case and ensure that you were getting the right results. And it's exactly the process that we follow within the dissertation process. So
That's awesome.
direct correlation to good research and good in the professional world.
Absolutely. I've been able to take that that learning of inclusivity and bring it into my professional life on so many occasions, and it's really just recently actually I had I'm working with Kitsillas First Nation, helping them with some of the research, traditional use research, and we sought some feedback from their legal counsel on one of the on the work we're doing, just as as a second set of eyes, and so great comments back from the lawyer and on my research, and in a different era I would have had a hard time with some of those comments, but I realize how important it is to reach out and be inclusive and get that feedback and work together and have this sort of ebb and flow of ideas, and the more we can be inclusive, the stronger our work is going to be.
Yeah, and you know what, that's a good point. It's not always easy to take those comments and take that feedback and that interpretation that you hadn't expected and rework it into what you're doing.
Exactly.
It can be a time-consuming process and some kinds, personally difficult, but it makes the end product so much better.
Oh, so much better. And when you're working in teams and management, teaching your teams how to not take the feedback personally, and how that it's not how it's really about the rigor, of the ideas and and how you can grow so much from that.
Yeah. Well, I have to admit, doing a doctorate, that'll once you've been through that, you can take it.
It really helps. So that's the third point. It's inclusive.
Okay.
So the next point, and we've been talking a little bit about this already, is that it's rigorous. What the work that we do, we're always striving to reach our highest potential. As much as we possibly can, whether it's with our ideas or with our relationship building or with connecting, the dots between our professional and scholarly lives. There's never a dull moment. We're really pushing ourselves in so many ways. Yeah,
and I would say that one of the things that I came into the doctoral program expecting to come out with perfection everywhere, and you know what? It doesn't exist, and I think that really opened a door for me that allowed me to make mistakes and know that I'm just going to keep moving forward and hopefully keep getting better. This, when I came out with the doctoral degree, that's not the end. It just keeps building on from there, and I think it's really liberating in a way, and that's what I see happening with research as well. You do it, you hone it, you do your lessons learned, you incorporate it into the next thing you do, and you just keep getting better and better.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it means pushing. Like we were just talking about in terms of inclusivity, the feedback that you get. Trying to piece that together. Is very rigorous. Peer review, when you start publishing, it's a very rigorous process. And sometimes the comments we get back are not always that positive, And so figuring out how to incorporate all of that and growing from that, and pushing ourselves, and it's also rigorous when you're in the field. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you have your family lives, and you know, your professional life sometimes takes you in one direction, and you have to make, you know, you have to be able to, you know, make decisions and sacrifices. I remember you talking about, you know, going on vacation with your husband and always having your laptop.
Every vacation picture I'm studying in some way, shape, or form. Yes, he finds it quite funny.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so that leads us to the next point, and this, you know, is that it's also adaptable, and we're learning how to be adaptable in the sense that, and this, I think, is where we also bring in this interdisciplinary paradigm. And I think the beauty of interdisciplinarity is the adaptability that is built into that, so that we are, it's this kind of organic, you know, breathing process, and you try something out, and then you're moving into a new, it doesn't necessarily work, so you're adapting ideas from this discipline, maybe for example, for me, I take a lot of material from cultural anthropology and indigenous issues, and I adapt that into Canadian studies, and working with legal scholars, and working with indigenous elders, and I love creative writing, and so I'm always thinking about that creative piece, and then technology. How does it all come together? You know, I mean.
Yeah, and I have to admit that this slide, the one that we embrace interdisciplinary paradigms, this is the one slide that you've got that excites me the most.
Awesome.
Because, as you know, I did my dissertation on language revitalization and the use of technology.
Yeah.
And I work in a technology firm, and now having the social science background and my anthropological background as well, I can just see so many intersections and so many ideas. I really think that this is, with the way that technology is moving into our life and allowing us to intersect everything, this is going to be the wave of the future. I think it's an incredibly exciting direction that we're going in, and the fact that this program allows for that is, I think this is what's going to take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, and here we are sitting with Google Glass, and you know, streaming our conversation, and you know, and I think this university, Royal Roads, is also you know, really pushing that envelope of adaptability in terms of education and what it looks like moving. We're in the 21st century, which I can't believe, you know, but moving like past the 21st century, you know.
Yes.
I mean, it's just awesome. I mean, the possibilities. And I think interdisciplinarity and actually moving into transdisciplinarity, where we're bringing in that applied element, that practitioner piece, is so exciting.
Yeah, and everything you look at now, it has so many aspects to it. I mean, if I look at the company where I work at, we have a program where we can work from home, and it's all intersected with how technology works, how HR works, how management works. It all comes together.
Yeah.
And then you have to look at, okay, so what does that mean for their family? What does that mean for their neighborhood?
Totally.
What does that mean for commuting? And things like, okay, crime rates go down because people are home all the time. You don't have empty neighborhoods. When you start looking at all the variables that go into that, it's just fascinating.
It's awesome. Yeah. And I think this, there's two more. I'll go through them quickly because I think we're asking to wrap up here. So the next one is that, you know, I really think the work we're doing is inspirational, and I get a lot of inspiration from the idea that as applied practitioner scholars, the work we're doing there's a tangibility to it. We're really dealing with real world issues, and that groundedness of you know, bringing that interdisciplinary paradigm out of the academy and into the everyday life, and you know, really addressing some of the most important issues that are happening.
Yeah. And I'll let you move on.
And then the last piece is that it really is transformational, and I think that you and I both can really speak to that idea of how much we grow from the work that we do. And, you know, your doctoral research, how much it pushed you. Working in Indigenous communities, how much you grow from those experiences, and you know, it really has a lasting impact.
Absolutely. I mean, if I look at myself 4 years ago, I think my confidence level has gone up immensely. I think my ability to take on new things has increased tenfold. And my relationship with others, both, you know, in the community where I was doing the research, my personal life, you know, it's changed, but all for the better. So, yeah,
That's
definitely
awesome.
transformational.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
I think of that railroad slogan, "Life changing." You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it really is.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is.
And I hate to sound like a commercial,
I
but
know.
yes, it is.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I think we have a wrap here, and thanks so much, Nicole, for giving me some feedback and sharing some of your experiences. And
Thanks for inviting me, Simon.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
great.